Gary Daniel now instructs us on the obligation aspect of ethical practice, obligations between researcher and cataloger, among others. Gary was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and graduated from the University of Cincinnati with a master's degree in German. From there, he attended the University of Kentucky, receiving a master's of science in library science. His first professional position was as German monograph cataloger at Harvard University. After Harvard University, he worked at Ohio State University as a serials and monograph cataloger. From there, he became a supervisor in Tech Pro at OCLC for a number of years. Life led him to London and Canada, where he has worked at the University of Western Ontario as a catalogue and collection librarian for philosophy, theory, criticism, and classical studies. He was the acting director of Library Technical Services for a year, and currently he is a knowledge management librarian, a role that involves managing access to scholarly information resources that support all levels of learning, scholarship, and teaching. He tells us that while in Milwaukee, he hopes to rekindle his love for bratwurst, beer, and bowling. Gary, you'll have to get yourself over to the Milwaukee Brat House on 3rd Street. Gary?
I do believe the short people are going to take over soon. Title of my paper is Achieving Obligation in Information Organization, Some Novel Approaches. Choose that entry that will probably be looked first under by the class of people who use the library. So advised Cutter in 1889 as he detailed what to choose in attaining objects. In fact, he listed this first, as it were, in order to stress its primacy. Similarly, 62 years hence, Haken, then Chief Subject Cataloging Division, Library of Congress, reiterated and affirmed that the reader is the focus in all cataloging principles and practice. Moreover, this focus on the reader was again considered primary, even over and above logical arrangement of material. Information organization or cataloging as practiced today resembles more a Procrustean approach to information organization with scant consideration to the reader's needs as the end goal. While this does serve a function, it is a very narrowly defined function and quite the departure from the aforementioned user-centered approach. What it leaves in its wake is the researcher grasping for relevant information that resonates with the information need at hand. Analysis of text for information organization purposes has taken on a life of its own. This has resulted in a focus on the text for placement in a controlled system for the sake and perpetuation of said system, rather than on the interest of the reader. Exactly when this turn from the principles of the work by Cutter and Haken took place is difficult to pin down. One could hypothesize that this turn occurred when information started being viewed as a commodity. Posited are some suggestions on how this happened, followed by ways to reverse or at least mitigate the effects of the trend. Information in its various forms and permutations can be treated and thought of in a variety of ways. One way to conceptualize information, and a fruitful way for this discussion, is to think of it in terms of a commodity. Thinking of information in such a way should not be too arduous a task. One need only consider the past rise of information brokerages, the increasingly tight relationship libraries have developed with vendors of MARC records, either through outsourcing or through shelf-ready material, and the purchase of large sets of bibliographic records, or rather organized information. That said, information as a product can be considered yet one more item to be purchased by consumers. This, coupled with references to patrons as customers, makes it legitimate to look at facets of consumer society in order to arrive at a clear understanding of information as a product to be consumed and the effects thereof. The availability of information for sale and its delivery to libraries is one aspect of this phenomenon. Libraries, acting as purveyors, in turn supply this information to their customers. They also produce their own organized information and make it available in various ways, organized and unorganized. In purely economic terms, the need is therefore given its object by the available goods. Preferences are oriented by the particular spread of products offered on the market, creating an effective demand. If this is a valid proposition, that is, information is a commodity, then the views of Baudrillard vis-a-vis consumers in and of society can be employed. This stretches the concept of commodity a bit, although not by much. Baudrillard claims that commodities constitute the language by which we communicate. He further reduces consumerism to elements of linguistics in order to elucidate and expand on various components of social phenomena. It is via consumption, like language, that we communicate and converse with each other. We simultaneously present information as a commodity and use it to communicate concepts and ideas. For libraries, the concepts and ideas are of most interest and importance. How we do this, how we organize them, leads us in an ethical or unethical direction. The system of needs is a product of the system of production. Producers manufacture need. It is they who satisfy need by supplying X. In a captive environment, for example, a library catalog, one can only be satisfied with the supplies or the information contained within, or paradoxically, with information not contained within. Consumption is orchestrated initially as speaking to oneself, and it tends to play itself out with the satisfactions and disappointments in this minimal exchange. Library patrons and customers are there because the product has been created for them. The product is the need. Yet the approach to information organization is directed toward the established system of organized information rather than to the customer. Thus, information works like no other commodity known to consumers. I buy this because I need this, the tautology used by Baudrillard to drive his analysis of consumerism, the idea of shifting objects and shifting needs. Considering this in terms of the library or any researcher searching for our organized information, one could also posit the tautology, I search for this because I need this. The information-seeking theory of a researcher's need being satisfied once a state of equilibrium is reached would seem to reside in a standard perception of consumerism. Baudrillard describes our current world of consumerism as being beyond equilibrium, one without limits, one of unquenchable needs, constantly requiring renewal, constantly requiring difference. One need look no further than the typical keyword search, or rather the keyword search result. A simple need, or a need simply stated, results in hundreds, if not thousands, of responses or hits. It is an almost bottomless pit of gold in which everything and nothing simultaneously satisfy. The need for difference drives the search and will satisfy it if and only if difference can be identified. Such a search, however, retrieves not difference, but sameness, sameness in the guise of difference, for it all reflects an ambiguous search strategy. This renders the results completely meaningless to the user. Information dissolves meaning to total entropy. If we can manage to increase meaning, resolve meaning, coalesce meaning, and in essence activate a negentrophic effect, organize information in a framework that is reflective of activities and practices, then information and the organization of information will produce meaning. Baudrillard uses the example of the proverbial and philosophical question of the observance of the tree fallen in the forest to demonstrate the reality status of unobserved events. Access to information becomes an issue of reality. Merely meeting and confronting information becomes problematic, for the human mind is finite and cannot comprehend all information at once. By necessity of mental limits, there must be an order. However, a cacophony of mental stimuli, not to mention visual and oral, takes place. Only having been first processed through the eyes and ears does it register. So much information broadcasted, yet much of it not registered, perceived but not processed. A sort of protective mechanism for the capacity of the brain, while immense, limits the amount and speed at which humans can process information. Only having passed through the human mind does information become real. Despite all of our information stored in servers, waiting as it were, like a fallen tree to be heard, observed, and experienced, until said information is accessed, that is, once it has been negantropied, does it become real. It then fulfills the other side of the equation and fully becomes information. The events of this world, both real and unreal, are experienced and consumed via mass media that enriches our private and banal lives. This life is only made tolerable if and when we consume society offered as real. Yet we remain comfortably distant and fascinated by any broadcasted atrocities, crime stories, and famine in far-off lands. The events of the world are both real and unreal. Unreal in the sense that they are not experienced. Ironically and coincidentally, researchers engage our organized information, although hopefully not as broadcasted atrocities, in libraries in a similar fashion by means of a computer screen that simulates a television screen, the same screen that brings simulated reality into their lives. This information frequently becomes no more real than the aforementioned false experiences. Accustomed as we are, however, to our window on society as perceived to be in the media, the information we gather in can only be perceived as real or unreal. Thus, a wall is created through which meaningful communications can scarcely be made, much less maintained. Much like language, consumption has become a system of exchange and production of coded values, signs, and objects. Differences become the matter of exchange in terms of objects, individually or of group prestige, and as a system of communication which satisfies group integration. All consumers are involved with all others in this exchange, yet they also act alone. Simultaneously, consumers experience a drive to act in accord with the crowd, while also individually seeking to separate themselves. Acting alone, or rather communicating alone, does not achieve any exchange. We purchase or consume what becomes signs of happiness, yet these signs do not satisfy, so we purchase and consume more. Everything purveyed via the media is at our beck and call. This accumulation of signs alienates us from another. How do we communicate with one another, particularly in the midst of this alienation? And just who are the others? They are the chemistry department, meaning the individual chemists. They are the history department, meaning the individual historians. And they are our patrons or customers. We are referred to as the library. All is in third person. All is without a face. Each refers to the other, interacting with the other as non-entities, as simulations. For each, the other is a simulated hyperworld contained wholly and solely of itself and themselves, a world separate and unknown to the other, save in an imagined, unreal, unexperienced fashion. we remain intellectually and physically separate and distant. This alienation has a trifold origin. By calling our patrons customers, we have in effect moved them psychologically into a different category, further and further away from us, resulting in less and less obligation to them. Obligation requires a face-to-face interaction. It requires communication between actual people with actual names and actual faces. Ironically, while libraries certainly have successfully made significant advances in achieving access via remote connections to resources, if anything signifies alienation, this does. Great efforts are made to ensure patrons are connected remotely. Researchers, remote as they are, have no face and nary a name, nary an identity. To the anonymous researcher, the only obligation, seemingly, is to provide access to what they have already determined to be their need or want. Additionally, information organization has been placed increasingly further and further away from the researcher it is meant to serve. Or rather, the researchers become no more real to us than earthquake victims in South America, whom we experience by extension via the media. Recall for a moment the advice and principles stated by Cutter and Haken. Cataloging departments once housed in the main library are now displaced, oftentimes situated quite far from where they once were. Admittedly, of course, there was more need for that earlier physical proximity enjoyed by cataloging departments in the pre-online catalog years. Information organization and information collection, however, is also performed by distant vendors, with not only less connection, but actually no connection to the researcher. In the absence of obligation, which alienation ushers in, there is an ever-present tendency to catalog for the catalog, to organize for the sake of organizing. The obligation becomes tied to the rules and principles of information organization, rather than to the information and research needs of the faceless and anonymous researchers. This hyper-isolation favors an adherence to a contrived language devoid of any meaning based on activity and practice, rather than a communicative exchange between the knowledge organizers and the researchers, the knowledge seekers. Meaning of words is contained not in dictionary definitions. Ambiguity simply plays too large a role in standard discourse for dictionary definitions to be uber authoritative. Language can be considered a living organism. As such, the essence of meaning lies in the activities and practices of people who engage in said activities and practices. To use a Wittgensteinian example to illustrate this point, in his philosophical investigations, Wittgenstein wrote, "If a lion could speak, we could not understand him." One might be both intrigued by the idea as well as perplexed by the supposed inability to communicate with the lion. This is especially true if we keep in mind that communication is at the heart of language. What then is the barrier to communicating with the talking lion? Language is not just words, or to phrase it another way, words do not a language make. There is a distinct social aspect to language. The inability to communicate with the lion is due to a gross mismatch of the two societies. Particularly pertinent are the different meanings inherent in the daily activities and practices of the lion and us, in spite of any superficial similarities. Just as isolated activities of the lion have no meaning for us, and isolated activities of ours have no meaning for the lion, neither do isolated activities of of the specialized researcher have meaning for us or for the lion? Our society, the milieu of information organizers, is alienated from the researcher society. Communication is therefore impossible. How then can we possibly describe and organize information in a meaningful way for researchers or for customers, for whom exchange of ideas and science is a commodity, with whom we cannot communicate and from whom we are alienated? Currently, we employ Library of Congress subject headings as a means of description, access, organization, and communication. Subject headings as now applied, diversification according to ZIP, compete with keywords with their myriad ambiguity as now searched, unification according to ZIP. As systems grow larger, both in number of individual bibliographic records as well as in the number of full-text items available, as well as the number of full-text items available online, precision of keyword searches is marked by failure. However, we best express ourselves with ordinary language. Blair, in his exposition on Wittgenstein, maintains that when we reduce a researcher's information request to a set of search terms, there will inevitably be a loss of meaning between what was meant by the researcher and what was retrieved in the search. This we do in part by forcing information into our organized paradigm. Wittgenstein argued for an understanding of meaning grounded in activities and practices. Currently, our attempts at information organization are predicated on a systematic approach to understanding and interpretation of subject content. Patrick Wilson's treatment of subject analysis or subject determination speaks of that central omnipresent one subject. However, admittedly, there is not necessarily one subject. Much depends on a variety of content analysis methods employed, none any better than the other. How clearly an author can describe or write is a function of the author's ability. To the patron, what resonates as a subject can be quite varied. That which captures the reader's attention oftentimes determines for the reader the understood central theme or subject. Ignorance of meaning as used by researchers is at the root of the problem. It is the alienation on a variety of levels that has rendered true communication with researchers so exceedingly difficult. Perhaps a reconceptualization is in order. A variety of approaches to subject analysis are valid. In deciding which approach to employ, it is necessary to realize that not only by means of concerted appreciation for obligation can we know how our patrons and customers would approach the subject. Beyond our scope is the ability to anticipate all the ways researchers will search for our organized information. Instead of relying solely on the author's intent to describe aboutness when organizing information, we should direct our attention to the reader's intent when attempting to fill that information need. Two relatively straightforward approaches can be utilized in an effort to communicate better with researchers, including undergraduate students, graduate students, and faculty. Catalogers need to be engaged in activities common to their clientele. That is to say, they should be attending faculty lectures, seminars, and colloquia in the subject areas of their assigned specialties and responsibilities. By learning the language that researchers use in the practice of their everyday activities, catalogers would come to a more complete understanding of how specialized concepts are used and consequently the meaning associated with such concepts. Taking this information back with them, they would be armed with a more complete appreciation for what and how researchers may think in the process of searching for information. Accordingly, this could and should color how information is organized. information could then be organized with the reader in mind so that it can be discovered. Catalogers and organizers of information who engage researchers in this way stand a higher probability of achieving and maintaining contact, and thus an appreciation for meaning based on activities and practices than any remote vendor could ever hope to achieve. A similar end result can be realized by catalogers working the reference desk, albeit perhaps to a lesser degree. Catalogers who work at a reference desk provide a unique perspective on the information organized in the catalog, for they are the ones with the understanding of the structure of that organization. Although there is a scarcity of true information-seeking behavior found at the modern-day reference desk, engagement with researchers seeking information, even on a limited scale, would have an enlightening effect. Both approaches hold the potential for a fruitful outcome. The enhancement of the finding tools by means of enhancing the organization of information with the researcher as the focus. This would significantly negate Morville's statement that information hard to find is information hardly found. These suggested courses of action would require library administrative realignment, or at the very least, administrative endorsement. It would establish an administrative acknowledgement of the value and legitimacy of seeking obligation as a necessary and laudable role in the execution and efficacy of information organization. In determining how people think of concepts, it is instructive to consider their respective frames of reference. Frames of reference are not absolute. For any one individual, frames of reference serve an adequate function, albeit only temporarily. In the absence of time, with different stages of life, frames of reference also change. In the organization of information, however, each item described has its own frame of reference. How information is organized on the one end plays a significant role in how successfully it will be accessed and found on the other end. Somehow it must match or catch the changing frame of reference of the researchers. The organization of information, in order to achieve and maintain any semblance of ethics, must be predicated on researchers finding that which has been organized. Meeting that information need should be our primary concern. To increase research satisfaction and to make for a pleasurable experience, the search for organized information must match the information as organized in the system. A positive experience with our system of information organization results in a satisfied researcher. Although controlled vocabularies have distinct advantages, to wit, the ability to level out ambiguity and bring similar concepts and words together, they also suffer from some disadvantages. They consist of contrived elements of language. They are not based on activities and practices, but rather on definitions as stated in a dictionary. Such a weakness has been elucidated clearly by Wittgenstein in his discussion on language games. How the expression is used provides great insight to user behavior, the reader's intent. One way to gauge how an expression is used is to look at what tags a user applies when tagging a bibliographic record. The practice of tagging has been described as good for keeping found things found, yet bad for actual findability. For a tagger, the reader's intent, the reader's interpretation is primary. The author's intent is secondary, if not tertiary. On the surface, this is anathema to all that traditional cataloging holds to be its professional purview, although it certainly lies closer to the views of Cutter and Aiken. Considering, however, how the user perceives the text lends a considerable amount of insight into meaning as it pertains to activity and practice. Tagging has some recognized problems, including lack of control. There are a plethora of synonyms, homographs, singular and plural nouns, hierarchical and idiosyncratic madness. In short, we see none of the basics we've come to exploit with controlled vocabulary. While recognizing the particular weaknesses of folksonomic tagging, there are some positive attributes which can be employed to mitigate some of these weaknesses. An ideal solution may be the suggestion of a hybrid consisting of contrived language, that is controlled vocabulary, together with folksonomic tags, thus combining the strengths of both. Employment and manipulation of user-applied tags offers an opportunity to move closer to the researcher, albeit via proxy, rather than the personal relationship previously described. Adding tagged free text terms as an uncontrolled subject keyword would be one solution, albeit somewhat limited in effect, for it would only retain the one-to-one correlation of tagged terminology to bibliographic record. This allows Wittgenstein's argument to be satisfied, that is, associating meaning with the researcher's activities and practices. We could actually improve researchers' needs and expectations further. We could anticipate expectations via an enhancement of authorized headings in the Library of Congress authority file with tagged terminology. Okay. Of the 7 types of tags usually employed, only those that are descriptive hold any value for us in the process of Library of Congress authority file enhancement and concomitantly discovery enhancement. Tagging and Library of Congress subject headings already coexist in the mind as well as in the ether, but in practice the two would become one. Because researchers tend to search known terms, whether these are learned terms from established taxonomies or free text terms, it is imperative that the term search, the term framed in reference to activity and practices, matches the index term input as part of the organizational process of information organization. This matching can be successful through adding C-from references to Library of Congress authority file records based on free text tags employed by the researchers during the search process in an effort to provide a representation of the meaning couched in activities and practices, and ultimately to increase findability. Metadata tags applied by humans can indicate aboutness, thereby improving precision. Library staff would adjudicate and add user tags as appropriate to Library of Congress subject heading authority records on a local level. Previously employed tags would retrieve an increased yet closely related array of resources hitherto not retrieved. The result would be an enhanced information seeking and discovery experience. The tag search will retrieve items not searched, but with a bona fide Library of Congress subject heading. This then has the potential for becoming a learning opportunity, even if only by serendipity when the subject heading is realized. We run the risk of actually educating researchers. This would serve to bridge the gap between controlled language devoid of meaning and meaning based on what researchers actually do, as defined by activities and practices. A retrieval system manipulated in this way may ultimately come closer to one that can differentiate nuances. Language can have many meanings, that is, be indeterminate without being viewed as faulty. Indeed, it need only be as determinate as required for the task at hand. By capitalizing on how language is actually used, by considering how it is seeked in activities and practices, we can come to a clearer idea of what is meant. Enhancing information organization in the manner suggested optimizes findability. Human cooperation is required to alter how we approach information organization. Providing access to our organized information in such a way that allows it to be accessed requires an ethical appreciation based on an obligation to engage researchers on their own level and on their own terms. ambiguities in language usage create a barrier as well. Unless we attempt to bridge these gaps, we will forever be presenting information organized either well or poorly in a way that is neither used nor understood. Thank you.
Time for a few questions for Carrie.
I actually have several, but quite a few actually. But one of the things that really jumped out at me was, it seems to me that this approach comes up against a different ethical issue. The approach you're talking about is very labor intensive, and it butts up against the issue, the common practice of shared cataloging. And so for a cataloger to get to know, first of all, I don't know any cataloger who just has just one or two areas of subject assignment. I'm the history liaison at our institution, but I regularly catalog education, engineering, physics, and stuff that I'm literally having to call people up because I read the thing 3 times, I still don't know what they're saying. But so that's one of the issues that's coming up against the, frankly, resource distribution issue that we have in librarianship. The second one is the fact that shared cataloging has been going on since the turn of the century, if not before, starting with LC subject cards and catalog cards back in the early 1900s. So wouldn't there be a problem if you're doing cataloging, doing shared cataloging, but you're essentially only cataloging for the historians at your institution? I think that the model you're presenting really breaks down the practicality. And also, I really don't see administration giving that kind of money to us. Seriously.
Well, think back to what David mentioned a little while back, that he catalogs people at his institution.
Right.
Okay, and this, what I'm suggesting is a way to bring the resources in our catalog closer to the researcher at my institution, at your institution. And yes, it is labor intensive. What is necessitated on the one end is a system that employs tags. Now, and tags may not be around forever. I think there's a talk later this afternoon about books on these. Who knows? Tags may be around forever. I don't know. But let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that they are. It is a way for the individuals at the university to tell you, to speak to you, this is how I think of this information. And one tag can then be applied to a subject heading, and then subsequently an array of resources result the next time that researcher types in that tag. Yes, there is some labor, clearly. Fortunately, butting up against that huge labor that you suggest is the fact that in our system, you have to log in. You can't just use the system and apply tags. You have to log in as yourself. Consciously know that you have to log in order to apply tags, which is limited to the number of tags applied to date. We've only had this capability within the last 6 months, I believe.
Encore.
Yeah,
yes. we have the same thing, and what we're finding out is that the only people really adding tags, frankly, has turned out to be our IT people and myself.
The tags to date have not been that useful for what I suggest. The system I suggest, though, adding it to the authority record, the theory behind it, it works in practice. And again, fortunately, the numbers aren't there to create a huge workload at this point in time.
Gentleman in the back.
To sort of stay out of the tag debate, because I use it in some areas and not in others, and I don't like sort of flashing and tagging it because to some sort of monolithic data, because it's generally not. But I think that we do know what language, at least in a published sense, our users are using, because we see these monographs in these journal articles and so on that have the language in them that, as a cataloger, again, at one of the largest research institutions in North America, we're doing everything. There's really almost nobody that specializes. And I've cataloged books in mathematics that are written in English that I have no idea what they're saying, and I'm at a complete loss to translate them into LCSH and then into Dewey when I want to classify them, because their words don't match any of the words we're using. Why can't we use some of the words that we're already placing in our published literature as we go about our classificatory work and upgrade to authorities even quicker? Tags might be one solution, but a possible solution would actually be a system that works for us instead of against us. I mean, our heading in many cases is so archaic, or there are even things that researchers never use in the literature, basically. They say the literature warranted basis, but I didn't want to see it. So why can't we update our systems with what's actually used even faster?
I mean, in lieu of using tags that someone has applied.
Right.
That's certainly a possibility. There's no, I can't argue against that. The same end result.
We'll take one more question. We'll comment, coming back to the issue of administrators. It's an unfortunate reality that administrators quantify the work, the time of the cataloger, but don't quantify the time of the researcher or the seeker. I don't think this is going to turn around until administrators start thinking in terms of quantifying the time it takes people to find information. One more question?
This is more of a comment. I appreciate your question very much. I'm wondering if the horse hasn't already left the barn. I mean, you know, the prospect of improving our OPACs. Most of the reference librarians at my institution search WorldCat. They don't look at our OPAC. You know, so is it too late? That's my question.
Well, yeah, our institution, the red books are no longer out for the public to use. And when I was going through undergrad, I used the red books, and all of you used the red books. And that's how you found what to search. And now you can search anything. But when you search anything, you ultimately search nothing. And that realization is hard to come by for some people. And it's a matter really, I think, of talking to the public service and saying, look, this is what we use. I mean, if they're searching WorldCat rather than their OPAC that the library's paying for, there's another issue there.
Right. But usually because we have a lot of copy cataloging, what's in WorldCat's the same thing as in their OPAC.
Yeah, often that's the case.
The records really aren't any different, and if they are different, it's because of local practice going to that local information you're talking about.
So they're searching WorldCat because the template to search is better than your home OPAC?
Our home OPAC is just, it's very hard to use. And so they use WorldCat.
Okay, thank you very much. The three of you can sit together for lunch. We have groups forming around the lunch day. We'll break for lunch now. We have Michael home.
Until about 1 o'clock.
Okay. It's after...
We have lunch in the back of the room, a variety of things. Feel free to wander around. You can try outside. I think they warmed up a little bit from the